Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss about GST slab rates or GST slab for taxation under GST. In the previous session we are discussed regarding what is GST, what are the features of GST, how that GST is implemented on interstate supplies, how GST is charged on intrastate supplies, etc. Today we are going to discuss the GST rates as well as the registration under GST. So GST rates, so there are 4 categories of GST rates: 5%, 12%, 18% and 28%. So which slab rate applies to what, we are going to see that. Especially for high rate of GST is attracted to luxury goods and sin goods. So what is sin goods then? Sin goods covers tobacco, pan masala, tobacco products, cigarettes and carbohydrated beverages and automobiles, etc. So your Sprite, Fanta and all those soft drinks covered under carbonated beverages. Okay. So these goods attracts high rate of GST, that is 28%. So our essential goods like food items and healthcare services, etc. are either exempt from GST or taxed at a very low rate. So all essential items covered attracts the low rate of GST, that is 5%. So who recommends the GST rate? So GST rates are recommended by the GST Council. So GST Council is an institution which constitutes of our finance minister as a chairperson of GST Council, and all the finance minister of states are the members of GST Council. So if you want to take any recommendation, you have to take the votes of all the states and then you have to weight those votes and then you can take the any amendments in GST rates. So for example, if the 5% category of goods, if you want to hike it to 10%, you have to take the voting powers and you have to take the recommendation or you have to take the consult of states in GST Council meeting. So till 2022 there are 41 GST Council meetings are done. So those out of 41 GST Council meetings, the present rates, that is 5%, 12%, 18% and 28% are prevailing today. So this is about GST tax rates. So next we are going to discuss about registration under GST. So from the last sessions we have discussed GST is charged on supply of goods and services. Then can any persons can take the GST registration? Yes, anybody can take the GST registration. So under GST, registration is voluntary. So if you want to take up the GST registration, you can take the GST registration. But there is a difference between persons liable to take registration or the voluntary registration. So there are certain limits specified by the government. So if your aggregate turnover exceeds those limits, then you are liable to take registration. If your aggregate turnover is less than that limit, then you need not take registration. But if you want to take up a registration, you can take the voluntary registration. So now what is threshold limit and who are the persons liable to take the registration? We are going to discuss that. Every supplier shall be liable to be registered under CGST Act of 2017 in the state or union territory from where he makes taxable supply of goods or services or both if the aggregate turnover in the financial year exceeds the threshold limit. So every person, every supplier, if he is registered in Karnataka, he have to take registration in Karnataka if he is making taxable supplies and if his aggregate turnover exceeds the threshold limit. Now two questions arises. What is aggregate turnover and what is threshold limit for registration? So what is aggregate turnover? What is turnover first? Yes, turnover in common parlance we can say that sales. So total sales can be termed as aggregate turnover. So what is threshold limit then? Government has specified certain amount as a threshold limit to get register yourself under GST. So let us see that one by one. So if you are a supplier of goods and if you are supplying your goods in a normal category of states, then if your aggregate turnover, that is if your total sales exceeds 40 lakhs rupees, then you are liable to take registration. And if you are a supplier of goods and you are supplying the goods in a special category states, so then if your aggregate turnover exceeds 20 lakh rupees, you are liable to take registration under GST. Then what is special category states? So the special category states are like this: Manipur, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Puducherry, Telangana, Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim and Uttarakhand. If you are a supplier in these states and if your aggregate turnover, that is your total sales, exceeds 20 lakh rupees, then you are liable to take registration. Okay. If other than these states, if you are a supplier of goods other than these states, then your aggregate turnover, if it exceeds 40 lakh rupees, you have to take registration. Okay. If you are a supplier of service, if you are providing a service in normal category of states, then if your aggregate turnover exceeds 20 lakh rupees, then you are liable to take registration. On the other hand, you are a supplier of service and if you are providing a service in a special category of states, then your aggregate turnover, if it exceeds 10 lakh rupees, then you are liable to take registration. So what are the special category states? Same like in case of supplier of goods, Manipur, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Puducherry, Telangana, Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim and Uttarakhand. If you are supplier of service in these states, if your aggregate turnover exceeds 10 lakh rupees, you are liable to take registration. Okay, if your aggregate turnover is only 1 lakh rupees, then you are not liable to take registration, but you can take voluntary registration. So why you can take voluntary registration? There is a concept in GST called input tax credit. So this input tax credit or refund of tax paid by a dealer is applicable only if you are registered under GST. So if you want to take up the input tax credit, you have to get registered yourself under GST. So thank you. Let us discuss the next topic in the next session. Thank you.